A man worth $10 billion disguised in clothes from a thrift store sits alone in the most expensive restaurant he owns. He's not here for the food. He's hunting for something money can't buy: honesty. But in a world of fake smiles and calculated kindness, his search feels hopeless. He orders the $500 Emperor's cut steak, a silent test for the staff. The young waitress who serves him seems different. There's a quiet desperation in her eyes that cuts through his cynicism. As she clears his plate, her hand trembles as she slips a folded napkin towards him. He expects a phone number, a plea for cash. But when he opens it, 4 chilling words stop his heart and threaten to bring his entire empire crashing down. The weight of Jameson Blackwood's fortune was a physical thing, a bespoke suit of armor woven from stock certificates and real estate deeds. It was impossibly heavy. At 42, he commanded Blackwood Holdings, a sprawling global conglomerate with interests in everything from luxury hospitality to biomedical technology. From his penthouse office, which scraped the clouds above Chicago, he could manipulate markets and shape city skylines with a single phone call. He was a king in a kingdom of glass and steel, and he was profoundly, achingly alone. The world he inhabited was a curated one. Every interaction was buffered by assistants, lawyers, and public relations handlers. The people he met had been vetted, their smiles polished, their intentions sanitized. They laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. They agreed with his opinions, even the half-formed ones. He was surrounded by mirrors, each one reflecting a carefully constructed image of the man they thought he wanted to be. The real Jameson, the one who had grown up in a small Ohio town with dreams of being an architect, had been lost somewhere along the climb. This evening's exercise in self-flagellation was born from that loneliness. It was a ritual he performed every few months, a pilgrimage back to reality. He would shed the skin of Jameson Blackwood, the titan of industry, and don the shabby persona of Jim, a man adrift in the world. The clothes were carefully chosen from a second-hand store on the city's south side, a faded corduroy jacket with worn elbow patches, a plaid shirt that had seen better decades, and jeans that were soft with age. A pair of scuffed work boots and a day's worth of stubble completed the transformation. He even wore a pair of non-prescription glasses with thick, unflattering frames. Looking in the cracked mirror of a gas station bathroom, he saw not a billionaire, but a man who might be struggling to make next month's rent. The anonymity was a relief, a cool balm on the perpetual burn of public scrutiny. His destination was the Gilded Steer, the flagship steakhouse of his hospitality division. It was the jewel in his culinary crown, a place famous for its dry-aged beef, $1,000 bottles of wine, and a patron list that read like a who's who of the city's elite. He had acquired the restaurant group 2 years ago, and while the profit margins were excellent, he had never set foot in this particular location. His reports, compiled by his COO, Arthur Pendleton, spoke of flawless service, impeccable quality, and record-breaking revenues. But reports were just numbers on a page. They couldn't measure the soul of a place. Jameson wanted to see it for himself through the eyes of someone who didn't matter. He pushed through the heavy ornate brass doors, and the city's clamor was instantly replaced by the hushed symphony of fine dining. The air was thick with the scent of seared meat, old leather, and expensive perfume. A wave of warmth from the roaring fireplace washed over him. The hostess, a statuesque blonde, whose smile was as bright as it was brittle, gave his attire a swift, dismissive glance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone implying he had wandered in by mistake. "A table for one." Jameson said, his voice a little rougher, a little less commanding than usual. She hesitated, her eyes flicking around the opulent, dimly lit dining room. Most tables were filled with couples in evening wear and groups of men in tailored suits. "Do you have a reservation?" "No." "Is that a problem?" Her smile tightened. "We are typically fully booked. Let me see what I can do." She tapped at her tablet with a perfectly manicured finger, the exaggerated motion designed to convey what an enormous inconvenience this was. After a moment, she looked up. "I can seat you at a small table near the kitchen entrance. It's all we have available." It was a classic brush-off, a table reserved for walk-ins deemed unworthy of the main floor. "That's fine," Jameson said, playing his part. He followed her past tables where diners paused their conversations to watch his passage, their curiosity tinged with disdain. He was an anomaly in this curated environment, a weed in a rose garden. He felt their judgment like a physical touch, and a familiar, bitter resentment coiled in his gut. This was the world he had built, a world that judged a man's worth by the cut of his suit. He was deposited at a small, wobbly table tucked into an alcove just as she'd promised. The swinging doors to the kitchen provided a constant jarring percussion of bangs and muffled shouts. It was the worst seat in the house. It was perfect. From his vantage point, he could observe the restaurant's machinery. He watched the waiters move with a predatory grace, their smiles calibrated to the perceived wealth of their tables. He saw the manager, a slick, dark-haired man, in a suit that was just a little too tight, schmoozing with a table of what looked like city council members. Jameson recognized him from the corporate files, Gregory Finch. Finch exuded an oily charm that didn't quite reach his eyes. He laughed loudly at a patron's joke, clapping him on the back. But the moment he turned away, the smile vanished, replaced by a hawk-like vigilance. He barked a quiet but sharp order at a passing busboy who flinched and scurried away. Jameson settled in, becoming part of the scenery. He was invisible, and from this position of invisibility, he could finally see. He saw the subtle dance of class and expectation. He saw the performative deference, the transactional kindness. It was exactly what he had expected. It was a well-run machine, efficient, profitable, and utterly soulless. A deep sigh escaped him. Was this all his empire was creating? Polished surfaces with nothing underneath. He had been nursing a glass of water for about 10 minutes when a waitress approached his table. She was different from the others. While the rest of the staff had a hard professional sheen, she seemed softer, almost fragile. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with wide, intelligent brown eyes and chestnut hair pulled back in a simple, severe ponytail. Her uniform was neat, but showed signs of wear. The white apron faded at the creases. What he noticed most, however, was a faint tremor in her hand as she placed a basket of bread on his table. There were dark circles under her eyes, a weariness that her polite smile couldn't quite conceal. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "My name is Rosemary, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I get you started with something to drink?" He looked at her name tag. Rosemary. It suited her. It was a classic, gentle name, He deliberately ordered the cheapest beer on the menu. He watched for any flicker of disappointment, any subtle change in her expression that would betray her judgment. He saw none. "Of course," she said with the same steady, pleasant tone. "I'll be right back with that." As she walked away, he noticed her shoes. They were standard-issue black non-slips, but the soles were worn almost smooth, the leather cracked and peeling near the toes. They were the shoes of someone who spent countless hours on her feet, someone for whom a new pair was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was a small detail, but it told a bigger story than any of Arthur Pendleton's financial reports. For the first time all night, Jameson Blackwood felt a sliver of genuine curiosity. Who was this girl, Rosemary, who looked at a man in thrift store clothes and saw not a lesser person, but simply a person he didn't know it yet? But his simple, cynical test was about to unravel a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of his company, and this quiet waitress with the tired eyes and worn-out shoes was the only one brave enough to light the fuse. Rosemary Vance. Rosie, to the few friends she had time for, moved through the controlled chaos of the Gilded Steer like a ghost. She was efficient, she was polite, but she kept a part of herself locked away, a necessary act of self-preservation. The restaurant was a stage, and every night she played the part of the attentive, cheerful waitress. But behind the curtain of her smile, a storm of anxiety was raging. Her younger brother Kevin was the center of her universe. At 17, he should have been worried about college applications and prom dates. Instead, his life was a cycle of doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and terrifying trips to the emergency room. He had a rare genetic disorder that affected his lungs, a cruel lottery ticket drawn at birth. The treatments were experimental and astronomically expensive, and their insurance had long since hit its lifetime cap. Every dollar Rosie earned, every tip she pocketed, went into the bottomless pit of Kevin's medical bills. The job at the Gilded Steer paid better than any other service job she could get, but it came at a cost. The manager, Gregory Finch, was a predator in a well-tailored suit. He had discovered a discrepancy in the previous month's inventory, a mistake Rosie had made out of sheer exhaustion, logging a shipment incorrectly. It was a minor error, easily correctable. But in Finch's hands, it became a weapon. He had cornered her in his office, his voice a low, menacing purr. He'd accused her of theft, threatened to have her fired and blacklisted, ensuring she'd never work in a reputable restaurant in the city again. And then he had offered her a deal. She could work to pay off the loss, which he had inflated to a staggering $5,000. Her paychecks would be garnished, her tips monitored. She was, in effect, his indentured servant. She knew he was lying. She knew the debt was a fabrication, but she had no proof, and the threat of losing this job, the only thing keeping Kevin's head above water, was paralyzing. Worse still, Finch had begun forcing her to help him with the real books late at night. She'd had 2 years of community college, majoring in accounting, before Kevin's condition worsened, and she had to drop out. Finch used that knowledge. He made her reconcile his fabricated invoices to help him hide his own, much larger crimes. She saw the numbers that didn't add up, the invoices from suppliers she had never heard of, the vast sums of money being funneled into an account under a shell corporation. She was trapped, a reluctant accomplice to a crime she was only just beginning to understand. Every shift was a tightrope walk over a canyon of fear. When she first saw the man in the corduroy jacket, Seated at table 32, her sympathy was immediate. It was the worst table a place where Finch stuck people he deemed undesirable. She had seen the hostess lead him there with a barely concealed sneer. The other waiters would likely ignore him, focusing their energy on the tables with a higher probability of a hefty tip. Rosie wasn't built that way. Her mother had always taught her that a person's worth wasn't in their wallet, but in their character. She approached him with the same genuine respect she offered the CEO at table 5. When he ordered the cheapest beer, she simply nodded and smiled. It was a small act of defiance against the restaurant's unwritten caste system. As she went about her duties, she kept an eye on him. He wasn't on his phone, nor was he trying to catch anyone's eye. He was just watching his gaze, sweeping over the room with a quiet, unnerving intelligence. There was a stillness about him, a self-possession that seemed at odds with his shabby appearance. He looked less like a man down on his luck and more like a predator in camouflage, patiently observing its territory. When she returned to take his food order, she steeled herself. "Have you decided on an entree, sir?" He looked up from the leather-bound menu, his eyes meeting hers over the top of his thick-framed glasses. "Yes, I think I'll have the Emperor's cut." Rosie's professional composure almost cracked. The Emperor's cut was the most extravagant item on the menu, a 48-ounce porterhouse, dry-aged for 90 days, served with a truffle reduction and seared foie gras. It cost $500. It was a meal ordered for spectacle, for Instagram posts, for expense accounts. It was not something a man in a faded plaid shirt ordered ever. She instinctively glanced down at his scuffed boots, then back up at his calm, unreadable face. Her mind raced. Was this a joke? Was he a food blogger trying to create a viral video? Or was he simply delusional, someone who had no idea what he was ordering? Finch would have her head if this man couldn't pay. She had a choice. She could question him, embarrass him, and steer him toward something more appropriate. That's what Finch would do. But then she looked into his eyes again. There was no bravado there, no hint of delusion. There was just a quiet challenge. It felt like a test. And in that moment, Rosie made a decision. She would treat him with dignity. She would afford him the same assumption of legitimacy she gave everyone else. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "An excellent choice, sir," she said, her voice even. "And how would you like that prepared? Medium rare," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "And a glass of the Cheval Blanc, 1998, to go with it." Now she was truly floored. The Cheval Blanc was over $2,000 a bottle. He was ordering it by the glass, but even that was a $300 proposition. Combined with the steak, this single diner at the worst table in the house was about to run up a tab that was more than her monthly rent. Her training screamed at her to get the manager to ask for a credit card up front. Finch's rules were clear on this, but her instincts and a strange sense of kinship with this quiet, observant man told her to trust him. "Right away, sir," she said, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. She walked away, her heart pounding. She could feel Finch's eyes on her from across the room. She keyed the order into the POS system, her fingers trembling slightly. The system automatically flagged the high-value order and sent an alert to the manager's terminal. Rosie knew he would be on his way over. She braced herself for the confrontation. Sure enough, Finch intercepted her near the wine station. "Vance!" He hissed, his body blocking her path. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Table 32 just ordered the Emperor's cut." and a glass of the 98 Cheval Blanc. Yes, Mr. Finch, I just put the order in. Are you insane? His face was flushed with anger. Did you see the guy? He looks like he just crawled out of a homeless shelter. You didn't get a card from him first. He didn't seem like the type to be joking, sir, Rosie said, keeping her voice low and respectful. I didn't want to insult a guest. Insult a guest? Finch scoffed, his voice dripping with venom. He's insulting us by being here. When he dines and dashes that $500 steak and $300 glass of wine are coming out of your paycheck. You understand me, every last cent of your fabricated debt. He leaned in closer, his breath sour with coffee. You're already on thin ice with me. Don't make me push you off. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. He was right. If this man couldn't pay, she would be ruined. The debt Finch held over her would become insurmountable. She would lose her job and Kevin would lose his lifeline. But as she looked past Finch's sneering face toward table 32, she saw the man watching them. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see the dynamic. He saw Finch's aggression and her fear, and he simply nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement. It was a tiny thing, but it sent a jolt of courage through her. He knew. He saw her. In that moment, she felt less alone. I understand, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I will take full responsibility. Finch glared at her for a moment longer, then stalked away, muttering under his breath. Rosie took a deep, shaky breath and proceeded to the wine cellar to retrieve the legendary vintage. She handled the bottle as if it were a holy relic, using the Coravin to extract a perfect pour without pulling the cork. When she delivered the wine to the table, her hands were steady. Your Cheval Blanc, sir. He took the glass, swirling the deep ruby liquid. He didn't taste it right away. Instead, he looked at her. Is everything all right, Rosemary? Your manager seemed agitated. Everything is fine, sir. She lied, the professional mask snapping back into place. He's just very passionate about maintaining our standards. The man took a slow sip of his wine. His eyes closed for a moment, savoring it. When they opened, they were fixed on her. I have a feeling, he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, that you have higher standards than he does. Rosie's breath caught in her throat. He saw right through her. He saw the lies, the fear, the struggle. He saw her. For the rest of his meal, an unspoken understanding flowed between them. He ate his steak slowly, deliberately savoring every bite. He asked her about the city, but not in the way tourists did. He asked about the neighborhoods, the people, the hidden corners. He listened, truly listened to her answers. He made her feel for the first time, in a very long time, like a person, not just a servant. And as she watched him, an idea, desperate and terrifically dangerous, began to form in her mind. This man was different. He was powerful, she could feel it. Not in the way Finch was with his cheap bullying, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. He was a man who understood value beyond price tags. Maybe he was the lifeline she and Kevin so desperately needed. It was a wild, insane gamble. But as she looked at Finch across the room, laughing with his wealthy patrons while he slowly bled his staff dry, she knew she had no other choice. She had to take the risk. She had to try to pass him a message. The rhythm of the dinner service pressed on a relentless tide of orders plates and polite inquiries. Rosie moved through it on autopilot, her body performing the familiar dance, while her mind raced plotting. The man at table 32, her mysterious, paradoxical guest, was finishing his coffee. Time was running out. Every time she passed his table, she felt his observant gaze. It wasn't predatory or uncomfortable. It was watchful, patient. It was the gaze of a man waiting for something. Her plan was both simple and terrifyingly risky. She couldn't speak to him openly, not with Finch's reptilian eyes, constantly scanning the room. A whisper could be overheard. A direct conversation would be suicide for her career. The note was her only option. A silent plea, a shot in the complete dark. What would she even write? Help me. It sounded pathetic, desperate. My boss is a crook. It sounded like a disgruntled employee's petty complaint. No, it had to be something more. Something that would pique the curiosity of a man like him. Something that hinted at a problem bigger than her own. She thought about the coded ledgers Finch made her reconcile. The invoices from Prime Organic Meats. A company that didn't seem to exist in any legitimate business registry. The massive markups. The way Finch always looked over his shoulder when he was handling those specific documents. She didn't know the whole story, but she knew enough to know it was dirty. It was a secret Finch would kill to protect. That secret would be her weapon. During a brief lull, she slipped into the employee break room, a cramped, windowless space that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed a fresh, crisp linen napkin from the service stack, identical to the ones on the tables. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen she'd fished from her apron. She took a deep breath, trying to channel the quiet courage she'd seen in the stranger's eyes. She needed to be concise, intriguing, and alarming. She had to give him a reason to believe her, a breadcrumb he could follow. She scribbled on the napkin, her handwriting tight and hurried. They're watching you. It was a hook. It would make him question everything, make him paranoid. Who were they? Why were they watching him? The kitchen is not safe. Vague, but menacing. It could mean anything from poor hygiene to something far worse. It cast a shadow of doubt on the very product he had just consumed. Check the ledger in Finch's office. He's poisoning the supply chain. This was the core of it. The ledger was the proof. Poisoning the supply chain was a phrase that spoke of corruption, of a systemic problem. It sounded professional, serious. It wasn't a personal plea. It was a warning about the integrity of the entire establishment. It was a problem a man of substance would want to investigate. She didn't sign her name. The note had to be anonymous, a ghost's whisper. She carefully folded the napkin into a small, tight square and tucked it deep into her apron pocket. The feel of it against her leg was like holding a live coal. Her shift was nearly over. The man had already paid his bill in cash, leaving the exact amount of $867.53, including tax on the small black tray. It was another strange detail. No credit card meant no name, but the amount was precise, not rounded. It was the act of someone who dealt in specifics. He was waiting. As she returned to his table for the final clearing, her pulse throbbed in her ears. Finch was standing by the host station, deep in conversation, his back to her. This was her chance. "Will there be anything else for you this evening, sir?" she asked, her voice miraculously steady. "No, thank you, Rosemary. The meal was exceptional," he said. His eyes, however, said something else entirely. They were focused, waiting. "I'm so glad to hear that." With practiced movements, she began to gather the coffee cup and the water glass. Her hands moved over the table, a flurry of professional efficiency. As her right hand picked up the empty sugar caddy, her left, hidden from the room by her own body, slid the folded napkin from her pocket and placed it on the table, immediately covering it with the bill tray she was also clearing. The entire transaction took less than a second. It was a sleight of hand, born of desperation. She picked up the tray, the note now concealed beneath it, and turned to leave. But the man spoke again, his voice sharp enough to cut through the dining room's hum. "Wait." Rosie froze her back to him. Her blood ran cold. Had he seen? Was he going to expose her, right here, and now? Was this all a cruel game? She felt a dizzying wave of panic. Slowly she turned to face him. He was no longer looking at her, but at the empty space on the table where the bill tray had been. He had seen her place the note, and he had seen her pick it back up, hidden under the tray. He had expected her to leave it. Her trick had been too clever by half. She had hidden it so well he thought she had taken it back. His eyes lifted to meet hers. There was no anger in them, only confusion and a flicker of disappointment. Rosie's mind reeled. She had failed. In her attempt to be discreet, she had outsmarted herself. She stood there, trapped in the spotlight of his gaze, the damning napkin burning a hole in the tray she held. She had to fix this. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, she walked back to the table. Her movements were stiff, unnatural. She could feel Finch's attention, shifting his conversation, pausing. He was starting to watch her. She reached the table and, without a word, tilted the tray just enough for the small white square of napkin to slide off and land silently on the polished wood. She didn't look at the man. She couldn't. She simply placed the tray back down on top of the note, this time leaving it for him. "You forgot your tip." She whispered the words barely audible. It was a terrible, flimsy excuse, but it was the only thing she could think of. She turned and walked away, not daring to look back, her entire body trembling. She felt like she had just jumped from a plane without a parachute. Jameson Blackwood watched her retreat, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and sudden ice-cold clarity. He had seen the entire fumbled exchange, the initial slip, her panicked retrieval, and the final desperate deposit. Her whispered words, "You forgot your tip," were absurd. He had left no tip. He had paid the exact amount, a deliberate signal that he was not a typical customer. The note was the tip. The information was the currency. He waited until she had disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. He glanced towards the manager Finch, who was now staring at his table with open suspicion. The charade was over. Jameson casually placed his hand over the bill tray, his fingers closing around the hidden napkin. The texture was wrong for currency. It was cloth. He stood up, putting on his threadbare jacket. He gave Finch a slight, meaningless nod, the kind of gesture an ordinary man gives a figure of authority he doesn't wish to engage with. Then he turned and walked towards the exit. He didn't look back. Once outside, in the cool, damp night air, he leaned against the brick wall of the adjoining building, the city lights of Chicago blurring around him. The sounds of traffic and sirens felt distant, muted. His heart was beating faster than it had in years. He wasn't Jameson Blackwood, billionaire. He was just a man on a dark street, holding a secret. He unfolded the napkin. The hastily scrawled words seemed to glow under the street lamp. "They're watching you. The kitchen is not safe. Check the ledger in Finch's office. He's poisoning the supply chain. Jameson read it once, then a second time. This was not a plea for a better tip. It wasn't a waitress's phone number. It was a declaration of war. Poisoning the supply chain. The words were a punch to the gut. It was an attack on the Blackwood brand, on the very promise of quality and luxury he sold to the world. If it were true, it was a cancer in his empire. If it were a lie, it was a dangerous game. His simple test for honesty had unearthed something far darker. The quiet waitress with the worn-out shoes and terrified eyes hadn't just served him a meal. She had served him a conspiracy on a linen napkin, a mystery that stopped him cold and irrevocably changed the course of his night and quite possibly his entire company. He looked back at the warm golden light spilling from the windows of the gilded stair. It no longer looked like a restaurant. It looked like a crime scene. The city air, thick with the smell of rain and exhaust fumes, did little to clear Jameson's head. The cryptic message on the napkin felt like a brand against his palm. His undercover mission, once a melancholic exercise in self-discovery, had instantly morphed into a high-stakes corporate espionage thriller. The shift was jarring, but it ignited a part of him that had long been dormant, the ruthless, decisive strategist who had built his empire from the ground up. He walked for several blocks, letting the anonymity of the crowded sidewalks swallow him. He needed to think to separate paranoia from possibility. They're watching you. Who, Finch or someone else, was the warning for Jim, the schlub in the corduroy jacket, who had drawn undue attention, or for Jameson Blackwood, the owner they couldn't possibly know was there. The kitchen is not safe. A health code violation, or something more sinister, poisoning the supply chain. That was the phrase that resonated with cold, hard dread. It implied a deliberate, systematic deception that went far beyond one corrupt manager skimming off the top. It suggested an attack on the integrity of his entire brand. He found a quiet, dimly lit bar a few blocks away, a stark contrast to the opulence of the gilded stair. He took a booth in the back, the worn leather cool against his skin, and ordered a whiskey neat. He pulled out his burner phone, a simple, untraceable device he kept for excursions like this. He had one number programmed into it. The phone rang twice before a crisp, British-accented voice answered. "Yes." "Arthur, it's me." There was a brief pause. Arthur Pendleton was more than Jameson's chief operating officer. He was his anchor. A man of impeccable logic and unwavering loyalty, Arthur had been with him since the early days. He was the only person in the world who knew about Jameson's clandestine outings. "Jameson, is everything all right? Your voice sounds—" "I'm fine," Jameson interrupted, his tone sharp. "But something's happened at the Chicago Steer. A problem with the service. I can have the regional director there in the morning. I assure you the quarterly reports are stellar." "The reports are lies, Arthur." Jameson said, his voice low and intense. He quickly recounted the evening's events, his disguise, the dismissive staff, the arrogant manager, Gregory Finch. He then described the waitress Rosemary, her quiet dignity, her worn-out shoes, and her paradoxical order. Finally, he read the words from the napkin aloud. Silence hummed on the other end of the line. Arthur was a man who processed information, who dealt in facts and figures, not in cryptic warnings from waitresses. "Poisoning the supply chain," Arthur repeated slowly. "That's a very specific and serious accusation. It could be slander from a disgruntled employee. This waitress, Rosemary, did she have a grievance? She had fear in her eyes, Arthur. The kind of fear that goes beyond a bad boss. Finch cornered her after she took my order. He was threatening her. She was terrified, but she still did this. Jameson stared at the napkin. She risked everything to get this to me. People don't do that over a petty grievance. There's more to this. I can feel it. Instinct is not evidence. Jameson. Arthur cautioned, his voice laced with concern. A direct accusation against a manager based on an anonymous note is problematic. Finch could sue for defamation. I'm not going to accuse him. I'm going to investigate him. Jameson countered. I need you to get me everything you can on Gregory Finch. Employment history, financial records, social media, everything. But it has to be completely off the books. No internal audit trails, no red flags. Use the external contractors we use for hostile acquisition, due diligence. I want to know who this man is by sunrise. Consider it done, Arthur said, his tone shifting from skeptical to operational. What about the ledger she mentioned, the one in his office? This was the crux of the problem. I need to get my hands on it, Jameson said. Tonight, before he has a chance to suspect anything is wrong and destroy it. Jameson, you can't be serious, Arthur protested. You can't break into your own restaurant. It's reckless. We can arrange a surprise audit officially. We can seize the records legally. No, Jameson insisted. An official audit gives him time to react, to hide things. I saw the way he was watching me when I left. He's already suspicious of Jim, the guy who ordered an $1,000 meal and left no tip. If a team of auditors shows up tomorrow, he'll connect the dots. The element of surprise is our only advantage. I have to get that ledger tonight before he comes in tomorrow morning. A long, weary sigh traveled through the phone. This is why your father worried about you, Arthur said softly. You have an entire company for this, but you insist on fighting in the trenches yourself. My father also told me to never ask a man to do something I wasn't willing to do myself, Jameson retorted. Besides, who would suspect a man who looks like me of being a corporate raider? My disguise is the perfect cover. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Jameson knew he was weighing the immense risks against the potential disaster of a compromised supply chain. All right, Arthur said, finally the resignation clear in his voice. But you are not going in alone. I have a contact in Chicago, a security specialist. Her name is Wren. Former MI6, specializes in non-destructive entry and data retrieval. She's the best there is. I'll have her meet you. Send me your location. Good, Jameson said, a sense of momentum building. Also, I need information on the waitress, Rosemary Vance. Find out everything you can about her. If she's telling the truth, she's in danger. If she's lying, I need to know why. I'm on it. Wren will contact you on this number within the hour. Be careful, Jameson. This feels different. I know, Jameson said, looking at the whiskey he hadn't touched. That's what worries me. He ended the call and sent his location to Arthur. The waiting was the hardest part. He sat in the booth, the bar's low chatter and melancholic music, a stark backdrop to his racing thoughts. He thought of Rosie's face, the mix of terror and resolve. He had held the fate of multi-million-dollar deals in his hands with less anxiety than he now felt for this young woman he barely knew. She had placed her trust in a complete stranger, a phantom in a thrift store jacket. He couldn't let her down. 45 minutes later, his burner phone vibrated. A text message with a single line appeared. "Alley behind you. Black sedan. 2 minutes." Jameson paid for his drink and slipped out the back entrance of the bar into a narrow, refuse-strewn alley. As promised, a nondescript black sedan pulled up silently, its engine barely a whisper. The back door opened. He got in. The woman in the driver's seat didn't turn around. She was watching him in the rearview mirror. She was of indeterminate age, with sharp features and short, dark hair. Her eyes were chips of ice. "Arthur said you needed a ghost," she said, her voice a low, gravelly monotone. "Ghosts are expensive." "I can afford it," Jameson replied. "So I hear," she said, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I'm Wren. I've been briefed. You want to get into a manager's office at the Gilded Steer and access a ledger. Is it a physical book or on a computer?" The note just said, "Ledger." We have to assume it could be either or both. "Amateur," Wren muttered, but not unkindly. "Okay. The restaurant closes to the public at midnight. Staff is out by 1. Cleaning crew comes in at 4. That gives us a 3-hour window. The building has a state-of-the-art Blackwood security system." She glanced at him in the mirror again. "Ironic. Can you bypass it?" "I can bypass the Pentagon with a paperclip and a stick of gum," she said, without a hint of bravado. It was a simple statement of fact. "But your problem isn't the building's main security. The manager's office will have its own system. A separate keypad, maybe a motion sensor. And Finch himself. A man that crooked is a man that's paranoid. He might have his own camera." "What's the plan?" Jameson asked, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "Simple," Wren said, putting the car in gear and pulling smoothly out of the alley. "You're going back in, but not as a customer." She reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a duffel bag. "The cleaning company is called Sparkle Clean Solutions. Here's your new uniform. You're going to be my assistant. Try to look like you know how to hold a mop." The plan was audacious and brilliant. They wouldn't break in. They would walk in through the front door. By the time they arrived at a staging area in a nearby parking garage, Arthur had already worked his magic. He had hacked the cleaning company's schedule, adding 2 extra workers for tonight's shift at the Gilded Steer. He had created employee profiles for them, complete with names and social security numbers that would pass a cursory check. As Jameson changed into the grey janitor's jumpsuit, he felt the last vestiges of the billionaire ego strip away. He was now Mike, a night shift cleaner. Wren, already in her own uniform, handed him an ID badge. "Remember," she said, her voice all business, "we move with purpose. We don't linger. We don't make eye contact unless we have to. We are invisible. Once we're inside, I'll disable the internal security on Finch's office. You are my lookout. Your only job is to watch the hallway. If you see anything, you tap your comms once. Don't speak, just tap. Got it?" She handed him a tiny earpiece. "Got it," Jameson said, his mouth dry. As they drove toward the silent, darkened restaurant, Jameson's phone buzzed. It was a message from Arthur. He opened it. It was a preliminary background file on Rosemary Vance. Rosemary Vance, 23. No criminal record. Dropped out of City College accounting program 2 years ago. Sole guardian of younger brother, Kevin Vance, 17. Kevin suffers from cystic fibrosis advanced stage. Medical bills exceed $300K annually. Insurance maxed out, multiple outstanding loans in her name, residence a small apartment in a low-income housing block. Her mother died 3 years ago, father unknown. Jameson's blood ran cold. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was a young woman drowning. Her desperation wasn't for herself, it was for her brother. Her decision to write that note wasn't just brave, it was an act of profound, selfless love. And Finch threatening her job was holding a gun to her brother's head. The stakes of the night had just become infinitely higher. This was no longer about his company. It was about justice for Rosie. Wren pulled the van emblazoned with the Sparkle Clean logo to the service entrance at the back of the Gilded Steer. "Showtime," she said, her eyes already scanning every shadow. "Try not to get us caught, Billionaire." The service entrance of the Gilded Steer was a world away from its opulent front, smelling of stale grease and bleach. Disguised in janitorial uniforms, Jameson and the security specialist Wren blended in with the night shift cleaning crew, while Jameson stood as a lookout, pushing a mop bucket to feign work. Wren focused on Finch's office. With the unnerving calm of a seasoned professional, she looped the cheap wireless camera, disabled the door and motion sensors, and brute-forced the keypad lock. In less than 2 minutes, the sanctum of the corrupt manager was open. The office was a shrine to a small man's ego, but Wren ignored the decor. A quick search revealed no physical ledger. Her eyes, however, caught a hidden wall safe behind a row of unread management books. "There's a safe," she whispered into her comms. "Can't crack it quickly or quietly." Jameson's mind raced. Finch was arrogant. He'd used something personal. "What's on the walls?" he asked. Photos. Finch with the mayor, Finch at golf, Finch with a little league team. "The team," Jameson pressed. "Is there a date on a trophy? A jersey number? Trophy says 2023. He's wearing jersey number 1, Wren confirmed. "Try the date from the trophy," Jameson instructed, betting on Finch's ego. A few beeps, a pause, and then a soft thunk echoed through the comms. Wren was in. Inside was cash, a passport, and a single black leather-bound ledger. Wren worked with breathtaking speed. While a device copied a hidden encrypted partition from Finch's computer, she used a camera pen to photograph every single page of the ledger. The meticulous records of his crimes were now theirs. With the download complete, she replaced the ledger, closed the safe, and wiped away any trace of her presence. They slipped out of the office and rejoined the cleaning crew, melting back into the shadows and leaving the restaurant none the wiser. In the safety of Wren's vehicle, the data was uploaded to Arthur Pendleton's secure server. Arthur's team of analysts worked through the night, and what they unearthed was more horrific than Jameson could have imagined. The ledger and decrypted files painted a sickening picture. Finch wasn't just skimming profits. He was the local operative for a massive criminal enterprise. The Prime Organic Meats on his invoices was a ghost company. The real supplier was Westland Meats, a processing plant that had been shut down by the health department 6 months prior for extreme bacterial contamination. Finch was knowingly buying condemned toxic meat for almost nothing and serving it to his patrons at a premium, funneling the profits to an organized crime syndicate. The note hadn't been a metaphor. Finch was literally poisoning the supply chain. Just before dawn, Arthur called with the final chilling piece of the puzzle. "Jameson," he said, his voice heavy with disgust. "We found video files on the encrypted partition. It was his insurance." The files were short, secretly recorded clips from his office. They showed Rosie Vance, her face pale and strained, being explicitly threatened by Finch. He mentioned her brother's fragile health, her fabricated debt, and her lack of options. He had used his knowledge of her accounting background to force her to help reconcile his fraudulent books, believing this would implicate her and guarantee her silence. He had fatally underestimated her conscience. Jameson listened to the report, a cold, hard fury settling deep in his bones. The full picture was now horrifyingly clear. Rosie wasn't a disgruntled employee. She was a cornered victim who had committed an act of astounding bravery. His mission was no longer about his brand's integrity. It was about getting justice for the young woman who had risked everything because it was the right thing to do. The game was over. It was time for the reckoning. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of Jameson Blackwood's penthouse, illuminating a man transformed. The shabby disguise was gone, replaced by a flawless charcoal suit that radiated authority. He was no longer Jim the Wanderer. He was the chairman of Blackwood Holdings, a man whose quiet intensity could command boardrooms and bend markets to his will. He looked down upon the city, his kingdom ready to excise the sickness that had taken root within it. Arthur Pendleton stood beside him. The FBI and FDA are ready to move on your signal, Jameson. It's a coordinated strike. Not yet. Jameson said, his gaze fixed on the distant building that housed the Gilded Stair. Finch needs to see who he was dealing with, and this needs to be handled carefully for Rosie's sake. She's walking into a war zone today, and she's the hero of this story, not me. At 11:45 a.m., two imposing black SUVs pulled up to the restaurant, bringing the pre-lunch rush preparations to a halt. Gregory Finch, expecting a celebrity, rushed to the door, his practiced smile ready. The smile vanished, replaced by shock, as Jameson Blackwood emerged. Finch knew the face of the company's reclusive owner instantly. Jameson strode through the doors, flanked by Arthur and two men who were in fact FBI agents. The staff froze. "Mr. Finch," Jameson's calm voice echoed in the room. "We have business to discuss." He walked to the small, wobbly table near the kitchen. Table 32. "I had a meal here last night. It was enlightening." The blood drained from Finch's face. He stared, connecting the powerful man before him with the shabby ghost from the previous night. "You," he stammered. Jameson's gaze swept over the staff and landed on Rosie Vance. She stood, clutching a stack of menus, her face a mask of terror. She thought he was here to fire her, to ruin her. "My office," Finch managed to say, leading them down the hall. Inside the small room, Jameson went straight to the bookshelf. "A little league trophy," he mused, gesturing toward the hidden safe. "Is that where you keep the proof of your partnership with Westland Meats?" Finch collapsed into his chair. "I don't know what you're talking about." Arthur stepped forward with a tablet displaying the evidence, the ledger, the fraudulent invoices, the shipping manifests from the condemned meat supplier. "We know everything, Gregory," Arthur said coldly. "The money laundering, the toxic meat, everything." He swiped to the final image, a still from a video of Finch threatening Rosie. "And we know you blackmailed one of your waitresses," Jameson said, his voice dropping to a furious whisper. "You used her sick brother to coerce her into helping you. That is the one thing I find most contemptible." "She helped," Finch blubbered, a pathetic attempt to share the blame. She cooked the books. Jameson opened the office door. "Rosie," he called, his voice now gentle. "Could you step in here?" Trembling, Rosie entered the office. "Rosie," Jameson said softly, "Mr. Finch claims you were his willing partner." She looked at the pathetic, sobbing man, then at the floor. "He's lying," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "He threatened me. He threatened my brother's medical care. He made me do it." "I see," Jameson said, then nodded to the agents. "I believe you have what you need." As the agents cuffed Finch and led him away, a stunned silence fell. Jameson turned to Rosie. "Last night, a person in this restaurant showed incredible integrity and bravery," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "That person risked everything to expose a crime, not for personal gain, but because it was right. That person was you, Rosie." Tears of relief streamed down her face. "Your fabricated debt is erased," Jameson continued. "Furthermore, Blackwood Holdings is establishing a fully funded medical trust to cover all of your brother's care for life." A sob escaped Rosie's lips. "And as for you, a person with your integrity is wasted waiting tables. I am creating a new corporate position, Director of Ethical Oversight. You'll run a new employee welfare foundation and oversee our supply chain. You'll answer directly to me." The room was silent as Rosie stared, unable to comprehend the sudden seismic shift in her life, from a terrified waitress to a powerful executive. "Say you'll accept," Jameson urged kindly. "Yes," she whispered, the word filled with disbelief and dawning joy. "Yes, I accept." In the end, it wasn't the $500 steak or the billion-dollar empire that defined the story. It was a simple folded napkin and the incredible courage of a young woman who refused to let fear extinguish her integrity. Rosie Vance's story is a powerful reminder that heroes aren't always the ones in the spotlight. Sometimes they're the ones working a double shift with worn-out shoes, fighting silent battles we know nothing about. Jameson Blackwood set out to test the character of his employees and ended up having his own character redefined. Their story shows that one small act of bravery can unravel a web of deceit, and that true wealth lies not in what you own, but in the positive impact you have on the lives of others. If this story of courage, justice, and unexpected connection moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories that will restore your faith in humanity.